Have you ever changed what you were about to say because you noticed someone's face change? Maybe you softened your opinion, added a quick joke, changed the subject, said, "It doesn't really matter," even though it did, or walked away from the conversation and replayed it later, wondering, did I say too much? Did I sound rude? Do they still like me? This kind of self-monitoring can become so normal that you barely notice yourself doing it. You laugh when everyone else laughs. You agree a little more than you really agree. You explain yourself when no explanation was needed. You say yes before you have even asked yourself whether you wanted to. And from the outside, none of this looks dramatic. You may simply look polite, easy to work with, considerate, friendly. But inside, something else is happening. You are constantly checking the room for one question. Am I still okay with you? That question can quietly shape an enormous part of a life. What you say, what you wear, what you create, who you date, what you tolerate, which opinions you keep, which parts of your personality you turn down. And eventually, you may become very good at being liked, while becoming less certain who people are actually liking. This is why the people with the quietest confidence are interesting. They are not necessarily louder. They do not always dominate conversations. They do not walk around announcing that they don't care what anyone thinks. Often, they seem almost ordinary. But something is different. They can disagree without immediately explaining themselves. They can hear that someone does not like their choice and still sleep that night. They can say no without spending the next 3 hours writing an apology in their head. They can be misunderstood without rushing to correct every misunderstanding. And perhaps most importantly, they can receive criticism without allowing criticism to decide who they are. That is a very different kind of confidence. And it raises a deeper question. What changes inside a person when being liked stops feeling like a requirement for being safe? Because the need for approval is not always simple vanity. Often, it begins much earlier. At some point, most of us learn that certain versions of ourselves are easier for other people to accept. The agreeable version, the useful version, the calm version, the successful version, the funny version, the version that does not complain too much, the version that does not ask for too much. Maybe nobody ever sat you down and said, "This is the person you must become if you want to belong." Usually the lesson is quieter than that. You notice which behavior brings warmth, which behavior creates tension, which opinions make people uncomfortable, which emotions receive comfort and which receive silence. And you adapt. That adaptation is not automatically unhealthy. Human beings need each other. We all adjust ourselves socially. You do not speak to your employer exactly as you speak to your closest friend. You do not tell every stranger everything you think. Jung used the word persona for the social face we develop for the world. And having a persona is not the problem. We need one. The problem begins when the mask becomes so familiar that you are frightened to remove it. You start confusing, "This is how I relate to this situation," with, "This is who I am allowed to be." And then approval begins doing more than making you feel good. It begins telling you whether you are acceptable. That is when a simple social desire becomes expensive, because every room becomes something you have to manage. Imagine sitting in a meeting. You have a different opinion. You know what you want to say. But before you speak, you begin editing. Maybe that sounds too strong. Maybe they'll think I'm difficult. Maybe I should soften it. Maybe I should wait. Maybe someone else will say it. And eventually, the moment passes. Nothing terrible happened. Nobody rejected you. But something small happened inside. You disappeared from your own sentence. Now, imagine that happening hundreds of times, in meetings, friendships, relationships, family conversations, creative work, small moments where the real reaction appears and is immediately edited into the safer reaction. Over time, this creates a strange kind of tiredness, not because you are pretending every second, because you are constantly translating yourself into someone easier to receive. This is where Jung's idea of the shadow becomes useful. The shadow is often described as the parts of ourselves we do not want to recognize or include in the person we believe ourselves to be. And when being likable becomes very important, certain qualities can get pushed away. Your anger, your ambition, your selfishness, your boundaries, your competitiveness, your strange taste, your unpopular opinion, your wish to leave, your wish to say no, even your desire to be noticed, not because every one of these things should be acted out without restraint, but because they may not fit the person you learned you needed to be. Maybe your identity is, I'm the easy one. Then anger becomes dangerous. Maybe, I'm the helpful one. Then saying no becomes dangerous. Maybe, I'm the reasonable one. Then strong emotion becomes dangerous. Maybe, I'm the nice one. Then admitting that you dislike someone can feel almost morally wrong. The feeling does not disappear simply because it does not fit your identity. It goes underground. And then something interesting happens. You may begin reacting strongly to people who express openly what you have hidden. Someone says no without explaining themselves. You think, how selfish. Someone speaks confidently about what they want. You think, who do they think they are? Someone does not seem worried about being liked. You think, they're arrogant. Sometimes those judgments are completely accurate. Some people really are selfish. Some people really are arrogant. But sometimes irritation contains recognition. Someone else is doing openly what you have never given yourself permission to do. And that is worth noticing, not because you should become like them, but because the reaction may reveal a part of yourself that has been waiting for a more mature form. Maybe you do not need to become rude. Maybe you need to learn how to disagree. Maybe you do not need to become selfish. Maybe you need to learn how to say no. Maybe you do not need to stop caring about people. Maybe you need to stop treating their approval as proof that you are a good person. That distinction changes everything. Because there is a popular idea of confidence that says, I don't care what anybody thinks. It sounds powerful. Sometimes it even feels powerful. But it can become another performance. You were once controlled by people's approval. Now you become controlled by proving that their opinion cannot affect you. Someone criticizes you. You dismiss them. Someone tells you that you hurt them. You say they are too sensitive. Someone disagrees. You tell yourself they simply do not understand you. That is not freedom. You are still organized around other people's opinions. You have simply reversed the direction. Before, you needed them to like you. Now you need to prove that you do not need them. Quiet confidence is different. Quiet confidence can hear, I didn't like what you did, and remain curious. It can ask, did I act against my values, or did I simply fail to please this person? Those are not the same thing. Sometimes disapproval contains information. Maybe you were inconsiderate. Maybe you spoke too harshly. Maybe you made a promise and did not keep it. Maybe someone sees a behavior you genuinely need to change. Confidence should not make you unable to hear that. But sometimes the answer is different. No, I was not cruel. No, I did not betray what matters to me. I simply said no. I chose differently. I disagreed. I disappointed someone's expectation, and if that is the case, the uncomfortable work is not winning their approval back. It is tolerating the fact that they may remain disappointed. This is one of the places quiet confidence actually develops. Not in front of the mirror, not by repeating that you are enough, but in the small space between another person's disappointment and your automatic urge to fix it. Someone asks you for something. You want to say no. You feel the pressure. Your mind begins writing explanations. I'm really sorry. I wish I could. It's just that, maybe next time. Then, for once, you stop. You say, I can't do that. And you let the sentence end. Nothing spectacular happens, but inside you, something changes. You discover that another person's disappointment is uncomfortable, but survivable. That matters, because approval-seeking often survives by making disapproval feel more dangerous than it actually is. A strange look feels like rejection. A disagreement feels like separation. Someone's irritation feels like evidence that you did something wrong. So you rush to repair the feeling before you have even decided whether anything needs repairing. Quiet confidence creates a pause. What happened? Did I actually do something wrong? Is there something useful here? Or am I simply experiencing the discomfort of not being liked in this moment? That pause is small, but it returns something important to you: choice. You no longer have to obey every social discomfort, and once that begins, relationships start changing. At first, this can be frightening, because if you have built closeness by being easy to approve of, becoming more honest introduces risk. Maybe you disagree more. Maybe you stop saying yes automatically. Maybe you say, "That bothered me." Maybe you admit, "I don't actually want that." Maybe you stop laughing at things you do not find funny. Some people will barely notice. Some will respect you more. Some relationships may become deeper, and some people may not like the change at all. That does not automatically mean those people were bad. Relationships develop patterns. If one person is always adjusted and the other has become used to that adjustment, changing the pattern creates friction. But that friction reveals something valuable. Can this relationship survive two real people? Or did it depend on one person constantly editing themselves? That question can hurt. But it can also explain a very specific kind of loneliness. Being surrounded by people who like you, while privately wondering whether they would still like you if you stopped managing their experience of you. Approval can create connection, but if approval becomes the condition for showing yourself, it can also prevent intimacy. Because being liked and being known are not the same thing. To be known, somebody eventually has to encounter something they did not design. Your disagreement, your limit, your strange interest, your uncertainty, your frustration, your actual preference, and you have to discover that their reaction is theirs. You can care about it, you can listen to it, you can learn from it, but you do not have to rebuild yourself around it. This applies to creative work too. Think about how many ideas die before they are ever shown to anyone, not because they were bad, because the imagined audience arrived before the work was finished. People won't understand this. This is too strange. This sounds stupid. Nobody wants this. What will they think of me? So the sentence changes. The image becomes safer. The opinion becomes more acceptable. The work becomes technically fine and less alive. Again, the answer is not ignore the audience completely. If you make something for other people, their experience matters. But there is a difference between communicating with an audience and asking an imaginary audience for permission to exist. One improves the work. The other can erase it. Quiet confidence allows you to make something first and then listen, not erase yourself before anybody has even responded. And this points towards something deeper about confidence. The people who seem comfortable in themselves are not necessarily people who have finally convinced themselves that they are wonderful. Often, something simpler has happened. They have become more willing to know themselves accurately. They can admit, "I want approval. I get jealous. I sometimes want attention. I can be selfish. I can be generous. I can be frightened. I can disappoint people. I can be wrong. I can change my mind." And none of those things alone decides whether I deserve to exist comfortably inside my own life. This is closer to what integration means. Not becoming a perfect version of yourself. Becoming able to contain more of yourself without immediately pushing parts away, because they do not fit the image you want other people to approve. And paradoxically, that can make you softer. When your identity is fragile, disagreement feels dangerous. You become defensive because too much is at stake. If I am wrong, what does that say about me? If you dislike my decision, what does that say about me? If you leave, what does that say about me? But when your sense of self is less dependent on approval, another person's reaction does not have to carry that much weight. You can say, "Maybe you're right." You can apologize without collapsing. You can change without feeling humiliated. You can listen, because listening no longer threatens your entire identity. That is why quiet confidence often looks less dramatic than insecurity. It does not need to win every argument. It does not need the final word. It does not need to prove that it does not care. It can bend without disappearing. So how do you begin practicing this? Not by trying to stop caring what everyone thinks overnight. That is probably another impossible standard. Begin much smaller. Notice the moment when you start editing yourself for approval. Maybe someone asks what you think. You know your answer. Then you feel yourself reaching for the safer version. Pause. Ask, Am I changing this because kindness or good judgment requires it, or because I am afraid they will like me less? That one question can reveal a lot. Then, experiment with being slightly more truthful. Not brutally truthful. Not unnecessarily confrontational. Just less edited. Say, I actually see it differently. I don't want to do that. That's not really my thing. I need some time. I disagree. Then notice what happens inside you afterward, the urge to explain, to soften, to send another message, to make sure everything is okay. Sometimes you should clarify, sometimes you should repair. But sometimes the practice is simply allowing the discomfort to exist without immediately trying to remove it. There's another question that helps. Whose approval am I trying to secure right now? Because people is usually too vague. Maybe there are actually 3 or 4 people whose opinions carry enormous weight. A parent, a partner, a colleague, a certain social group, an imagined audience. And sometimes you discover that you have been organizing your choices around the approval of people who are not even present. That is worth seeing. Then ask, what would change if their disappointment were allowed to exist, not ignored, not mocked, allowed? Would you choose differently, speak differently, create differently, stay, leave, say no, say yes? There is no universal answer. The purpose is not rebellion. The purpose is to find out where your own life has been quietly outsourced, and then take some of it back. Because the real goal was never to stop wanting to be liked. Most people want to be liked. Belonging matters, affection matters, respect matters. There is nothing enlightened about pretending otherwise. The shift is more subtle. You can enjoy approval without needing approval to tell you whether you are acceptable. You can feel the sting of disapproval without immediately abandoning your position. You can care about another person's opinion without handing them authority over your identity. You can adjust without disappearing. Apologize without collapsing. Disagree without becoming cruel. Be disliked without deciding that something is fundamentally wrong with you. That is quiet confidence, not a person standing above everyone else's opinion, a person standing inside themselves while those opinions come and go. And perhaps that is why it feels so calm. There is less to perform, less to defend, less to monitor. The room can approve, the room can disagree, the room can misunderstand. You can listen, you can learn, you can change when change is needed, but you no longer have to leave yourself every time somebody else does not like what they see. And that may be the deepest freedom in all of this. Not becoming impossible to hurt, not becoming impossible to influence, simply becoming harder to abandon by yourself,